These are the images we feared were coming. Each person in this video filmed in a Queens hospital battling the coronavirus. More than 100 dead in New York in just the last 24 hours, 13 from this facility. The state taking action, allowing patients to split ventilators. While in Louisiana, the sharpest spike of new cases anywhere in the world. And as of this evening, the U.S. now has more than 82,000 COVID-19 cases. That's more than any other country in the world. Across the globe, more than 500,000 people now sick with COVID-19. That number was just 300,000 on Saturday. In Italy, cases continue to soar. In China, struggling to return to normalcy. The fear is now a resurgence of cases. The human and economic toll of all this just mind-boggling. The president today saying that we have to eventually get back to work. This as Americans continue pouring into food banks. 3.3 million Americans filing jobless claims. That's 4 times the highest number ever. And that number is only expected to rise. The Senate passed the biggest relief bill in American history. But what does it all mean for you? Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We'll have much more on the rise in cases, both in the U.S. and across the globe, in just a moment. But we begin with the state of our economic health. Stocks were up sharply once again on news of that massive relief plan passed unanimously in the Senate last night. But we know stocks are only part of the story when it comes to the overall economic picture. And the pictures we are seeing now are grim. More and more Americans are joining food lines and pouring into food banks. This was the scene in Florida today, just a surreal reality. But we begin tonight with that massive bill now through the Senate and making its way through the House and eventually to the president's desk. Jonathan Karl leads us off.
The coronavirus pandemic is taking a staggering toll on American jobs. Nearly 3.3 million filing unemployment claims in 1 week.
When I heard the number, I heard it could be 6 million, could be 7 million. It's 3.3 or 3.2. But it's a lot of jobs. But I think we'll come back very strong the sooner we get back to work.
The pain is widespread. As revealed in our new poll, 1 in 3 Americans say they or an immediate family member have been laid off or lost their job as a result of the pandemic. And more, half of all surveyed report a cut in pay or work hours. This morning, the Treasury Secretary said the staggering number of new jobless claims will be a temporary phenomenon.
To be honest with you, I just think these numbers right now are not relevant, and, whether they're bigger or smaller in the short term.
Barbara Bridges was laid off from her job as a sales manager at a hotel in San Antonio. Her biggest challenge now, how she's going to cover her $3,000 a month medical expenses.
There's thousands of us in the same situation, and we're just trying to stay as positive as possible, but it's definitely scary.
The $2 trillion recovery package is now headed for a final vote tomorrow, paving the way for payments to American families. That includes $1,200 payments plus $500 per child to individuals earning less than $75,000 a year. Those earning up to $99,000 a year will get a smaller check. And the checks would begin going out at the end of the first week of April. For millions of Americans, that help can't come fast enough. Devon Moisey, a single mother of 5 in North Carolina, was about to take a new job when the crisis hit. She has no savings.
Without any way to have an income or to make money, we were just sitting here pretty much devastated and hoping that this situation, this nightmare, will end.
And Jonathan Karl joins us now from Washington. John, there was one other number from our poll that I want to highlight, that 92% of Americans now expect a recession. The White House seems confident that this will be a temporary hit. But is there any concern that these job losses could just be the tip of the iceberg and take longer to reverse, even with the relief bill?
I think there is widespread concern about that. I think there's concern about that, frankly, at the White House as well as among the congressional leadership. And that's why you saw this movement to pass this $2 trillion bill, really unprecedented, not only in its size, Lindsay, but also in the speed with which Congress is moving forward on this. And even as they are doing this, $2 trillion in spending to shore up the economy, they are talking about going back to the well and doing it again if this crisis persists. So I think there's a real awareness that if this continues for much longer, that we are at risk of a very serious long-term economic downturn.
And John, we heard the president once again talking today about getting the country back to work. That's a big priority for him. What's the latest message there on a timeline and how it'll be possible with the ongoing health threat to so many parts of the country?
Well, first, you're not really hearing a lot of talk about Easter. The president came out and talked about the idea of getting the country back to work by Easter, of seeing crowded churches on Easter Sunday. Today, some of his advisors were saying, well, that's a goal, that's a notional, that's a way to give people some hope about when this might, that we want to get there eventually. It's not a firm date. But what you're hearing now from the president, and he's been suggesting this for a few days now, is the idea of loosening the restrictions in certain parts of the country. So keeping the tight restrictions in the hot spots, in the places that are hit really hard. Obviously, right now, that includes New York, California, Washington State, the state of Louisiana, New Orleans. But the issue here, Lindsay, is that it might be an interesting idea to reopen parts of the country that are not currently being hit hard by this virus. But you just don't know where it is going to appear next, and the indicators are lagging. So that's the idea. That's certainly what the president wants to see happen. I think the question now is whether or not the healthcare or the public health professionals agree that that can be done safely.
Right, if they sign off on that as well. Okay, Jonathan Karl for us in Washington. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Lindsay.
And as we mentioned, stocks soared on news of the relief package, but that's likely very little comfort for the 3.3 million Americans who filed for unemployment last week. Earlier today, our Rebecca Jarvis interviewed the CEO of Starbucks, Kevin Johnson, about what they're doing to help the company's nearly 350,000 employees across the country.
I wanted to provide some economic certainty to Starbucks partners. And so we made a commitment to all of our Starbucks partners in the U.S. and Canada that for the next 30 days, we will pay them, even if their store is closed or even if they are just uncomfortable coming into work. So we made that decision on Friday. And so on Saturday morning, I was uncertain, would Starbucks partners show up to open those stores? Because they all had the option to take be paid for 30 days, even if they chose not to come in. But you know what? Starbucks partners, they rallied and they showed up before dawn. And they opened over 5,000 drive-thrus across the United States.
People would have been paid whether they showed up to work or not, and they did at 5,000 of your stores.
That's remarkable. And Rebecca Jarvis joins us now. Rebecca, many large companies are able to support their workers through this downturn, but I want to ask you specifically about small businesses. If you're an owner of one of these enterprises, what could this relief package from Congress, particularly the loan incentives, mean for you?
Well, Lindsay, first of all, those small businesses, 30 million of them, the restaurants, the bars, the cafes, the smaller retailers in neighborhoods across the country, they have really felt the brunt of these lockdowns. And this stimulus package, the $2 trillion stimulus package, includes $370 billion that's specifically set aside for small businesses that will be loans that convert, they're forgiven over time if those small businesses maintain their employees. And the way that small businesses can go about getting these loans, they offer the loans up to $10 million, is that rather than having to go through the SBA, you can go through your own bank or a bank in your community, go through that bank, look for the loan, and then your bank will do all of the paperwork with the SBA. That's what Treasury Secretary Mnuchin says they will be working, and they believe that those loans can start going out in the next couple of weeks, Lindsay.
And we've heard so much about those $1,200 payments that the government has earmarked for many Americans. How soon could those checks be sent out, and will they be taxed?
The number that we're hearing now is in the next 3 weeks, and the answer to whether they'll be taxed is no. And if you are someone earning Social Security, for example, if you're a veteran, you also would qualify for those checks around the income requirements. It's the $75,000 income requirement or less. You get a $1,200 check, $500 for your kids, Lindsay.
And of course, we're nearing the end of the month when many bills are due. So what are some options for people who have rent or mortgage payments coming up and they just don't have the cash?
Well, something that's very important for people to remember right now is that a number of banks and credit card companies have been waiving fees, suspending foreclosures, making really big concessions for their customers at this point in time. But what's really, really important here is that you have to have a direct conversation with your bank and your credit card company. If you are facing financial difficulties because of the coronavirus, it is key to pick up that phone and let your bank, your credit card company know about it right now. The government also has suspended foreclosures. There's relief if you have student loan payments. Those student loan payments, the late fees, the interest have been waived on them as long as they are government-backed student loans. And the government through HUD has also said they will be suspending foreclosures through April. But again, Lindsay, key here, have the conversations, the difficult conversations, the ones that you might be afraid to have. Contact these companies because you are much more likely to get relief by having the conversation than not having the conversation.
Well, let's talk about those difficult conversations. I mean, what's your advice for those people who are worried about some other bills and that they need to approach the companies and give them a call and they just don't know what to even say? How do you start that conversation?
Well, first of all, it also includes wireless companies and utilities. Again, a number of these companies, AT&T, Verizon, a number of utilities have said they will not suspend service if you are running behind. They will not include late fees if you're running behind. So you want to call them up, tell them your situation, ask them what they can do for you, and then you want to get that in writing. Have them email it to you. The most important thing, names. If you are talking to someone on the other line, what's your name? How can I reach out in the future? What is the number that will confirm that this is all legit, that we've all agreed to this and this is what everybody is on the same page? And finally, Lindsay, I would tell people, remember that those stimulus checks, which are going to very likely be coming in the next handful of weeks, use those checks not to pay the mortgage, not to pay the things that you could get some relief on from the lenders themselves. Use that to pay for your groceries and the really important near-term necessities. Now, of course, if you can afford to make all the payments, do all the payments. You don't want to get behind for no reason. But if you are pressed for that cash, make sure that you're covering your groceries and your near-term expenses with those stimulus checks, because the other areas right now are getting some relief from the lenders themselves.
Oh, certainly some news we can all use. Rebecca Jarvis, thank you so much. We appreciate you as always. These extraordinary economic measures are taking place as we face a very grim reality. The United States now has the most coronavirus cases in the world, surpassing Italy and China. This hospital here in Queens, New York, is being called the epicenter in the epicenter. The Elmhurst Medical Facility struggling to take care of the soaring cases of COVID-19. As our Whit Johnson reports, one doctor takes us inside the facility where 13 people died in just one day.
Tonight, an ER doctor taking us inside what's been called ground zero of America's pandemic.
All the patients in this room, all the feet that you see, they all have COVID. And this is only one of the several rooms.
Dr. Colleen Smith at Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, New York, sharing her story with ABC News and the New York Times.
The frustrating thing about all of this is it really just feels like it's too little too late. Like we knew it was coming.
Overnight, the number of deaths in New York jumping by more than 100 to at least 385. At the hospital where Dr. Smith works, 13 people died in just 24 hours.
Elmhurst Hospital in Queens is right now the epicenter within the epicenter.
Today is kind of getting worse and worse. We had to get a refrigerated truck to store the bodies of patients who are dying.
Dr. Smith revealing the shortages they're up against.
Five ventilators. Oh my God.
A disappointing shipment of those life-saving ventilators. State health officials report that patients who need help breathing but don't have COVID usually spend 3 to 4 days on a ventilator. But COVID-positive patients spend an average of 11 to 21 days.
The concern is that all these ventilators that we're told are coming but haven't really started to materialize in large numbers, Are they really coming? Will we really get them?
New York now getting the green light to split ventilators if needed.
We have approved the technology that allows one ventilator to serve 2 patients. It's not ideal, but we believe it's workable.
The number of patients hospitalized in New York State jumping by 40% in a single day.
The line outside Elmhurst Hospital has been growing throughout the day. Dozens of people, many of them wearing masks, waiting to get inside.
Healthcare workers on the front lines. Mount Sinai Hospital confirming one of its nurses passed away from COVID-19. Now so many more answering the call. In just the past 24 hours, at least 12,000 retired healthcare workers offering to pitch in. New York University allowing some of its medical students to graduate early to join the fight. Officials warning the wave hitting New York will soon crash over other states. In Louisiana, a spike in cases, up 28%, the fastest increase anywhere in the world. More than 2,300 people there now testing positive, at least 83 dead. Tonight in Texas, the governor ordering all travelers from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and New Orleans to self-quarantine for 14 days or face a fine or even jail time. In Michigan, cases now soaring into the thousands. Doctors there are feeling it.
The additional stress and the additional uncertainty.
Dr. Eric Johnson making the painful decision to send his 2 children to live with relatives out of state. He's in a Detroit hospital 50 to 60 hours per week, worried about infecting his own family.
I'm definitely seeing kind of the worst cases.
But even as the crisis expands, President Trump is looking to reopen the country soon. Today, sending the nation's governors a letter saying the administration is working on new guidelines categorizing counties as high risk, medium risk, or low risk.
Our people want to go back to work. I'm hearing it loud and clear from everybody. I think it's going to happen pretty quickly.
But one pastor in Arkansas with a warning. 37 people in his congregation outside Little Rock testing positive after attending a children's event at the church. The pastor, Mark Polensky, is sick himself. On Facebook telling his members, "I would love to have you take this medical threat more seriously."
And Whit joins us now here in New York City. And Whit, you mentioned that Louisiana has the fastest growth rate of infections in the world. That is just stunning. And also there's a huge spike in New Jersey. Is that expected to be the next epicenter?
Lindsay, that's certainly the concern, that you could have these rolling hotspots across the country. New Jersey's governor is reporting a spike of more than 2,400 new cases since yesterday. The reason, he says, a combination of ramped up testing, but also an increase in community spread. Resources are so stretched thin that at some of the state's testing locations, they will soon start to only test symptomatic first responders and healthcare workers. Lindsay?
All right, Whit Johnson for us in New York. Thanks, Whit. I'd like to now bring in the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. Governor, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Sure.
You announced today 157 new cases in your state. By far, that's Maryland's largest one-day spike. This brings the state total to 580 cases. When do you think that the crisis will peak in Maryland, and how bad do you expect it to get?
Well, so nobody really knows exactly when it's going to peak. We're convening a coronavirus emergency task force that's made up of really smart doctors from places like Johns Hopkins and some of our top hospitals here in Maryland. And they've got different modeling, but we're nowhere near reaching the peak. We're just at the very beginning of this. And we're weeks, if not months, away from the peak. And you know, the Washington metropolitan area here, we've got now over 1,200 cases, and it's just been ramping up and going up at extremely high rates every single day.
And you're one of 29 governors to close all non-essential businesses. What do you make of President Trump's call to restart the economy by Easter and think about relaxing social distancing in lower risk counties?
Well, I'm not sure. First of all, just putting an artificial deadline of saying we're going to get everything open by Easter is unrealistic from all of the experts and the scientists that we're talking to, and that any other of the governors are talking. I'm the chairman of the National Governors Association. We had another call with the president and vice president today, and many of the governors are concerned about, just trying to figure out when this is going to peak, and not too many of the experts think that we're going to be reaching the peak in a couple of weeks. Look, everybody would love to see the fact that everybody wants to get back to work. We want to get our economy back on track. We want our kids back in school. And I understand the president wants to be hopeful, but we've also got to be realistic and look at the facts on the ground. And this idea of somehow, without any real data, picking high risk versus low risk, I don't think that's really realistic.
Now, state governments, of course, have most of the power to quarantine, issue stay-at-home orders, and close local businesses. If President Trump calls for a return to business as usual sometime soon, would you be prepared to obey or buck his demands at that point?
No, look, we're going to make the decisions that are right for the people in our state based on the science and based on the doctors, based on trying to save the lives of the 6 million people in our state. I think nearly every other governor would do the same. I don't think we're going to see those kinds of orders from the president, but just messaging, telling people everything's okay when it's not, is not going to be helpful. But certainly we're not going to make decisions to send people out if it's not safe.
There's been a fragmented approach across the country with respect to lockdowns and getting supplies to hospitals in need. Is that a concern for you? Is it time for a more coordinated national strategy to combat this pandemic?
Well, so that's one of the things that we raised again today with the administration and with the president and vice president directly. Last week, we brought up a list of items that we wanted them to address, and that's at the top of everyone's list. We've made a little bit of progress on that, and FEMA has taken a lot of action, and we've now started to declare states of emergency in a number of places. And the administration has been working together and communicating well with the governors, but we're still, everybody's behind the 8 ball, and we're all trying to work together at the federal, state, and local level to get behind this thing and to tackle this incredible challenge that we're all facing.
Do you feel that your state is ready?
Well, I'm not sure any of us are ready. Nobody's ever faced anything like this, but I believe we've been out ahead of it. We've been looking at this for a couple of months now. I declared a state of emergency 3 weeks ago. I was the first or second state to close all the schools statewide, one of the first to close all the bars and restaurants, and we've been taking aggressive, unprecedented actions almost every single day for 21 straight days. We're doing the best we can to try to keep people safe, keep hundreds of thousands of people from being infected, and hopefully save thousands of lives here in our state.
Governor, thank you so much for your time, and all the best to you and your residents there in Maryland. And when we come back, the growing concern, 23 sailors on a U.S. aircraft carrier testing positive for coronavirus. None of them are being allowed off that ship. The race to test them all. The worldwide impact, Italy and Spain still struggling through a crushing amount of deaths, the grim scenes inside their hospitals, and the everyday Americans on the front line of this crisis, serving food and other necessities as millions of Americans pour into food banks.
Hi, my name is Barbara Bridges, and I am a member of the hospitality community here in San Antonio, Texas. I was laid off last week as a result of the coronavirus, and all meetings and events pretty much for the next 2 months have been canceled. So there's thousands of us in the same situation, and we're just trying to stay as positive as possible.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Can you tell us your full name for the record?
Jeffrey Edward Epstein.
Every girl that meets Jeffrey starts off with giving him a massage. He's like, I'll pay you $200 for every girl that you bring to me.
Who else was underage?
All of them.
All of them?
He told me the younger the better.
How did he get so rich? How did he get away with it for so long? And what do the women who survived his crimes now have to say? Truth and Lies, Jeffrey Epstein. Listen free now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Right now, how do you make sense of it all? Now, afternoons on ABC, one place with the good information you need.
We are all in this together, and we're going to get through this together.
Pandemic, what you need to know. Afternoons at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC.
As a DACA recipient, this is a very worrisome time for me, especially. I don't have a lot of other options. My DACA expires this year on November.
Our decision to shut down the diner was a hard decision to make, but it was due to how fast the virus was spreading. It was something that we in the service industry, at least in this diner, had to tackle. And it was really hard because it meant closing the doors for people and closing the doors for our employees and ourselves and any type of revenue we were going to be able to make. I'm currently looking around $600 in my bank account, and that's only if I can get my car loan to be waived for this month.
And hopefully everything goes well and we can get back on track and I can get my DACA renewed. But that's also, you know, a flip of a coin. It's up to Homeland Security to really say whether or not that goes well.
Welcome back. As we reported earlier, the U.S. is breaking a disheartening record today. 3.3 million people filing for unemployment benefits as the uncertainty of this crisis continues to grow. And some real surreal scenes playing out across the country. Take a look at this. This was a scene last week, an endless line of cars wrapped around this Houston neighborhood as people wait in line for food. And as millions across the country face financial uncertainty, there are thousands of men and women stepping up to the plate, helping those in need. Kana Whitworth has more.
From coast to coast, Americans are facing unprecedented uncertainty. COVID-19 devastating our healthcare system and destroying the financial stability of millions of Americans. A grim record, nearly 3.3 million filing for unemployment benefits in just 1 week. And amid such a drastic economic downturn, many Americans face the new challenge of putting food on the table.
We're having an increased demand. So many of the people who are reaching out to our food banks are people who never imagined that they find themselves in this situation.
One food bank in Los Angeles reporting a 200% increase in visitors. But perhaps a reflection of the American spirit when there are those in need.
I'm disabled. I just got out of ICU a week ago. So, yeah, anything helps.
There are countless others stepping up to lend a hand. They aren't medical workers.
Come back later for dinner.
But they are putting their well-being on the line to provide the essentials as shocking scenes play out across the nation. Last week in Texas, cars wrapped around this Houston neighborhood as dozens of people handed out food. And this teen and his mother from Ohio.
So just come and take what you need and then give what you can.
Doing good where they can, using an old bookshelf as a makeshift food pantry.
It's going to somebody that needs it. So if somebody did come up with a truck and take everything, that's totally okay with us.
The situation so dire, the National Guard stepping in to help from California to Ohio.
I've been exposed to a lot of different parts of what goes on in the food bank, which really is opening my eyes to how many people we're actually serving.
And food banks overwhelmed by the surge of demand, but somehow they keep up.
We're operating at an extremely high level, almost doubling our daily distribution to about 180,000 meals a day.
Not knowing when this will end, they are serving their communities the best way they know how, one meal at a time. Kana Whitworth, ABC News, Los Angeles.
Serving us all one meal at a time, and Kana Whitworth joins us now live. Kana, we just saw the many people doing selfless work in these food banks, but let's drill down on how they work. Many of them are using these drive-through methods. What are some organizers telling you about how that's going?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Lindsay. I spoke with the CEO of a food bank in Indiana today, and he says they've been using that sort of tailgate distribution method for 20 years now. And while they used to serve about 250 cars at a time, now they're serving some 700 cars at a time. But because they already had that method down, they've been able to accommodate a lot more people, and they're able to do it very quickly and safely, not only for the people that need the food, but for the people that are volunteering to give the food as well.
And where's the money for these food banks coming from? I'd imagine running these is a very expensive operation.
Well, exactly, Lindsay, because it's not just food, right? They have a lot of costs. They have warehouses, they have delivery trucks, they need fuel. So while many food banks get their food directly from food manufacturers or grocers, they also need monetary donations. And that's something that you and I can do at home by logging on. You can donate money to your food banks, and you can do it right in your own community. Also here in Los Angeles, there's a food bank who says they offer people the opportunity to come volunteer for 4 hours, and if they do that, they can then go home with a full cart of food. And Lindsay, it's something that a lot of Americans are experiencing for the first time in their lives.
Kana Whitworth, thank you for that report. Good to see you. And when we come back, the human toll of this pandemic, families ravaged and separated, now sharing their stories, only able to communicate virtually. And we're taking a closer look at the state-by-state impact of those job losses. But first, our tweet of the day on what was supposed to be baseball's opening day.
We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. No bull, no spin. Now imagine getting your news like that. Just give it to me straight. ABC News, straightforward.
Can you tell us your full name for the record?
Jeffrey Edward Epstein.
Every girl that meets Jeffrey starts off with giving him a massage. He's like, I'll pay you $200 for every girl that you bring to me.
Who else was underage?
All of them.
All of them?
He told me the younger the better.
How did he get so rich? How did he get away with it for so long? And what do the women who survived his crimes now have to say? Truth and Lies, Jeffrey Epstein. Listen free now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, free on Apple Podcasts.
On March 17th, we were given notice that we had 24 hours to shut our doors. Exactly a week after we were banned from working, we got news from Governor Andy Beshear that independent contractors did qualify for unemployment. This is amazing to so many of us. I know it's made a big difference for us. It's going to make a big difference for us because I live in a household where it takes two people to get the bills paid, and it takes two people to make sure everything is taken care of.
Last week's stunning unemployment claims from more than 3 million Americans shows just how severe the impact of the pandemic is on the economy and American workers. But it's hitting different states at different levels. So let's take a look by the numbers. The top 5 states with claims this week: Pennsylvania with some 379,000, Ohio with nearly 188,000, and California with about 187,000 claims, followed by Texas and New Jersey. Pennsylvania's claims represent 5.8% of the civilian labor force in the entire state. After all, it was one of the first to close all non-essential businesses. Tiny Rhode Island has been hit hard as well, experiencing 64 claims per 1,000 workers. That's the highest concentration in the country. Nevada was close behind with 60 unemployment claims per 1,000 workers as its tourist-focused casino industry has been shuttered, and the job losses have hit some states with the same impact as a hurricane. The state of Louisiana had more than 72,000 claims last week. It hasn't seen such high unemployment numbers since 2005 when Katrina devastated the state. And unfortunately, the unemployment storm may just be getting started across the country, with claims expected to rise in the coming weeks. And we still have a lot more to get into tonight. What do you do if you're battling a non-coronavirus illness? We'll hear from one family and their struggle. And later in the show, the many selfless acts taking place in the middle of the outbreak. But first, here are some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
Right now, this is part of the eye wall. This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys.
So this is the 4th weekend of protests.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. So if you like getting behind the biggest news stories of the day, inside all the details, the backstory, and what will happen next, then listen to Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. It's like no other news podcast out there. Even the critics agree. Listen free on Apple Podcasts.
Coronavirus cases are soaring in New York State with more than 37,000 testing positive.
Almost any scenario that is realistic will overwhelm the capacity of the current healthcare system.
At Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, New York, the need for ventilators is great.
The challenge in each state is protective gear for health workers, ventilators for patients, and managing the healthcare system.
All the patients in this room, all the feet that you see, they all have COVID.
Louisiana's Governor John Bell Edwards is warning about the rising number of cases in his state.
But I can assure the public, COVID is present in every single parish across the state.
The pandemic pummeling America.
In New Jersey, the coronavirus death toll climbing to 81. Los Angeles is also bracing.
Texas and Illinois is detecting more cases.
As we continue to increase testing, the fact of the matter is those who test positive will continue to increase.
On Capitol Hill, House lawmakers are set to vote on the massive relief package the Senate passed last night, delivering relief checks to those hit hard by the outbreak.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi appearing optimistic.
We will have a victory tomorrow for America's workers.
Tomorrow's vote, a potential lifeline for American business owners and families now in limbo because of the novel coronavirus.
How am I going to make rent? How, bills, student loans.
At the epicenter of the novel coronavirus outbreak in Italy, the number of cases still rising.
More than 30 doctors have died from the coronavirus. Half are family practitioners.
We've got no masks, gloves, or anything from the state, she said. It's like we're soldiers fighting an invisible enemy with no weapons or provisions.
Welcome back. Tonight, the World Health Organization's top European official is reporting that 1 out of every 10 people infected, they are healthcare workers, many of them now in quarantine. In the United Kingdom, authorities are using drones in their efforts to enforce their stay-at-home rules in an effort to avoid the horrifying scenes now playing out in Italy and Spain. Our Ian Panel has more.
Tonight, the full force of coronavirus starting to strike Britain. Over 100 dead in the last day alone. Officials saying hospitals in London are facing wave after wave of patients, calling it a continuous tsunami. And the police now using drones to enforce new rules, warning anyone who leaves home without a reasonable excuse could be fined or even arrested. The UK trying to learn from the harsh lessons of Italy. Tonight, shocking new images from a hospital in Milan. Though the overall rates of infection are declining, every bed is full. Everyone is fighting to keep patients alive. Still, 40 medics have died in Italy, doctors and nurses who've given their lives to save others. World health experts say 1 out of every 10 people infected are healthcare workers. In Spain, the numbers surging remorselessly. More than 650 more deaths just today. And although countries like South Korea appear to have been through the worst, a new spike in cases is raising concerns about a resurgence of the virus.
And Ian Panel joins us now. Ian, let's talk more about those fears in Asia. You reported extensively in that region in recent weeks. In China and South Korea, the infections are down. But talk to us about why they're concerned about a resurgence.
Well, they're concerned primarily because they're starting to see a new uptick in the number of cases. Now, we saw that originally in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, Singapore. We're now seeing in South Korea. Remember, South Korea has been pretty much held up by journalists, by academics, by medics as an example of how to deal with an outbreak. They had a huge number of testing. They applied themselves very early on. They self-separated very early on. People wearing masks, people were sanitizing. However, as they started to appear to get through through this, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, they then started to relax some of those restrictions. Foreigners started to come into the country, and they brought a lot of cases with them, and people weren't abiding by the strict quarantine rules. So the South Korean government has now said any foreigner found to be flouting those strict quarantine rules when you come into the country will be deported from the country, and Koreans themselves will face time in prison.
All right, lessons that we can learn going forward here in the U.S. Ian panel for us in London tonight. Thanks, Ian. And now moving on to a concerning situation aboard a U.S. Navy vessel out in the Pacific. The aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt has been docked in Guam after at least 23 sailors tested positive for COVID-19. 5,000 sailors are inside the ship and will not be allowed off until the entire crew is tested. A now growing concern that the virus will continue to spread inside the vessel where the sailors are living in very tight quarters. Our chief global affairs correspondent Martha Raddatz has this story.
Tonight, one of America's mightiest warships is docked in Guam, with the coronavirus now spreading throughout the carrier. At least 23 of the sailors aboard the Roosevelt have tested positive for the virus, transported to a Navy facility on land where they are quarantined. The 5,000 sailors who remain on the Roosevelt will not be allowed to leave the pier as the Navy tries to stop the spread.
We are in the process now of testing 100% of the crew of that ship.
But containing it will be a massive challenge. I have been on those aircraft carriers. Like a cruise ship, these are floating cities without the luxuries. The hallways are extremely tight, and sleeping berths can house up to 100 sailors.
The danger here is that the whole crew becomes infected and the ship is not able to carry out its duties. So a large part of the U.S. military might in the Pacific could be tied up pierside for weeks.
The Navy insists no matter what happens, they can carry out their mission. But the Roosevelt was one of only 2 U.S. carriers underway in the entire world.
Our thanks to Martha. And back here at home, the virus is affecting people of all different ages and backgrounds and entire families, like the New Orleans couple with a newborn and the Massachusetts family who were considered fortunate that they were able to hold a funeral mourning several feet apart. Here's our Matt Gutman.
Tonight, the virus invading America is taking down entire families, including 5 of the 7 people in this picture of the Winehouse family who first started feeling symptoms nearly 3 weeks ago.
My dad, who's on oxygen in the ICU currently, and my mom was actually on a ventilator for 8 days, and now she's on oxygen in the ICU as well.
Days after his parents got symptomatic, Jason, his brother, and sister-in-law also got sick. The Missouri family is hopeful for their parents and grateful to their doctors and nurses.
What they're doing on a daily basis, sacrificing their health to save other people's lives is truly heroic.
An act of selflessness and necessity also replicated in thousands of homes across America, including in New Orleans, a new hotspot where authorities say a 17-year-old has died and where there are folks like Jonathan Gibson caring for his toddler Miles while he carefully cleans the bedroom he shared with his wife Tiffany.
Why is it that you call your bedroom with your wife Chernobyl, and why do you wear gloves and a mask to go in?
It definitely just feels like somewhere there was a huge schism that shook a lot of lives, and so going in there, it still kind of feels like a war zone.
34-year-old Tiffany started feeling symptoms 2 weeks ago. After 10 days and 4 trips to the ER, she was finally admitted with pneumonia, which means Jonathan now doesn't have any backup.
If you get sick, your son doesn't have anybody else to care for him right now.
Yeah, my parents live in Mississippi.
Alex Giles believes he got sick in New Orleans at Mardi Gras, but believes he brought the virus back to the family home in Maryland, where his wife Danielle has tried to nurse him without going near him.
I just delivered Alex's his food. Say hi to Alex.
Gingerly delivering food on that ironing board. She hasn't been any closer than 15 feet. The entire family under one roof, but only communicating on FaceTime.
I imagine that this is very trying because you're not only trying to care for your husband who's sick, you're also trying to prevent your kids from getting sick and yourself.
How do I keep my kids safe so that like a mama bear effect
making sure that everything is well.
And tonight we're hearing from Karen Mannering in England. She is fighting for her life and the life of her unborn baby.
You're going to take this home and you're going to kill someone. Just stop going out.
Warning everyone to stay inside.
Our thanks to Matt Gutman and certainly to the healthcare workers around the world. So many of us are feeling scared and alone right now. The fear can be especially acute, though, for those battling other medical conditions like Loriana Hernandez, who's being treated for breast cancer. And I want to thank you very much for joining us, first of all, Loriana.
Thank you so much. Just even hearing those stories is getting my heart racing of the anxiety I'm going through.
I can imagine. So you're
triggering.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was saying it's triggering a lot of PTSD for me for the health complications that I've had.
Right. I could imagine that would be the case. Now, your compromised immune system makes you especially high risk for COVID-19. You're a leukemia survivor, now in treatment for breast cancer. What kind of therapies do you have to have?
Well, right now, I'm not currently going under any therapies, but what the biggest issue and risk for me is that I'm a 5-year leukemia survivor, AML leukemia. I had a bone marrow transplant. I don't have my own DNA, and I have a habit of actually rejecting some blood transfusions. Fast forward 5 years later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, likely due to the full body radiation to save my life. And that has had I've had delayed healing. And now each and every day I have a wound nurse come to my house to pack a wound. So trying to recover from breast cancer with a compromised immune system from leukemia, having doctors at Johns Hopkins and also at Penn Med trying to, treat me has been very stressful because each and every day we have nurses that have to come into our house. We've taken some steps at home, and my husband is trying to learn to do what the nurses do and pack the wound so we can limit anybody coming in and out of the house.
Right, of course. And how are you managing to keep yourself healthy? I mean, I imagine that's one way, but what sacrifices do you need to make right now?
Well, for me, staying home is not a problem. I mean, after you fight for your life and you have AML leukemia with 25% chance of survival, I was separated from my son for more than a year. I was wearing the yellow gown on droplet precautions, and I was hospitalized for a year, and then having to stare death in the face and lose friends and then go through breast cancer. If they told me I need to sit home, I've been home since January. If they say sit home till June or July, I'm okay with that because I just want to see my son grow up. It's pretty simple. The other thing I tell people, that's one thing I can control and is stay home. The other thing is, and I said this from when I was diagnosed with leukemia, is what I call the 3 Ps of armoring up for life. That's prepare, present, prevail. And I say that we all have to prepare each and every day in our lives of how prepared we show up to any illness. It may not be COVID, it could be cancer, whatever it may be. So we can all present well to our medical team and then position ourselves to prevail. And so all I can say is each and every day, despite my low energy levels, despite the depression, despite the fears, I work out. So if, God forbid, it happens to me, I'm prepared the best I can be and the best version of myself. So I can present well, but all I can do is stay home and pray and be with my family. But it's hard for me to try to explain that to other people when I see people interacting. And I tell them, if you haven't been on the floor crying and knowing that you have a chance of death and not seeing your son and not seeing if your son will ever see you again, it just doesn't always click for everyone.
Right.
I've had friends get frustrated with me when I say you cannot come in the house.
You're a great example for all of us, though. I hear you talking about how you have low energy and anxiety and depression, but anybody just watching you right now, I'm sure, feels inspired. There are many who now fear going into the hospital and possibly risking coronavirus infection, but many also need to go for various cancer treatments or essential surgeries, for example.
Absolutely.
What kind of calculations have you had to make in managing your health in this moment? And am I correct that you don't have to leave the house at all?
Well, we've made some changes. Tomorrow, I was supposed to see my leukemia doctor at Johns Hopkins. Now, Johns Hopkins is a global leader in fighting COVID-19. Talking with my leukemia doctor and my infectious disease team at Johns Hopkins, they did not feel it was safe for me to come in, even though I need to know if I'm in remission from a very risky surgery of a double mastectomy for a bone marrow transplant survivor. I know it's very complex, but talking with them, they said, we don't want you to come into the building until June 3rd. So for me, that's a lot of anxiety to wait and make sure I'm still in remission from leukemia because of a breast cancer surgery. The other steps we've taken is teaching my husband to do the wound packing so we can eventually not have nurses come into the house. They're heroes and they're amazing, but they have 8 other patients throughout the day. And also my appointment next week with my Penn Medicine doctor, my surgeon and breast cancer surgeon, will be a telemedicine appointment. So we're doing everything we can through pictures, imaging, FaceTiming, to do everything that I don't leave the house. But my heart aches for all the warriors, the cancer survivors, and those currently in treatment who call and talk to me and say, I have to go in, and they're neutropenic, which means they don't have a way to fight any infection.
Right.
That's the reason when people say, why do we have to sit home? This is ridiculous. I realize there's a financial impact, but when you're talking about lives that you can save by staying home, it's huge.
I would
and
imagine
it's people like me.
I would imagine that you are giving people new perspective and new reason to stay at home just by hearing and seeing you. Well, Loriana, thank you so much, and we wish you continued health.
Thank you.
We're now going to bring in our friend, Dr. Richard Besser, former acting director of the CDC and longtime medical voice here at ABC. He now runs the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Always great to have you on, Dr. B.
Nice to be here, Lindsay. What an inspiring story that was.
What an inspiring story indeed. We'd like to talk to you a bit about the tricky balancing act that hospitals are doing as they try to battle coronavirus while also dealing with other typical ailments.
Yeah, I mean, that's a major challenge. When there's a new pandemic, a new emerging infection, the other conditions that people have don't go away. And so just thinking about the challenges that are there for people with diabetes and heart disease and cancer, and think about the particular challenges that lower income people have, that people have in rural communities or Indian reservations, they're going to be really challenged to get the care they need during a time of crisis.
Here in New York, the nation's coronavirus epicenter, yesterday Governor Cuomo was cautiously optimistic that the hospitalization was coming down thanks to our social distancing. But then today, we learned that in just one day, New York's hospitalization rate shot up by 40%. What do you make of that? And was yesterday's good news simply kind of false hope?
Well, I think it's a little early to either declare victory or defeat. You know, this is a long game. It's going to take a long time for this to develop, and the numbers are going to be very odd until we have sufficient testing out there to really be able to say what's going on in each community. You know, as we talked about once before, a pandemic is a series of local outbreaks occurring on different timelines. So New York is seeing a lot more activity than other cities. They're going to see this, but until we see widespread testing, a lot of the numbers we see are going to be affected by the number of tests that are being done, and rather than the true spread of the disease.
So how and when will we know if social distancing is really working?
Well, I think some of that does, again, come back to testing, being able to see that, being able to get the word from doctors and hospitals in terms of do they have beds, do they have enough equipment, can they meet the needs? Without really good data, and without us hearing from the public health scientists who really know how to model this and track it and really look at those numbers, it's going to be hard to say. But in any infectious disease outbreak, though, there's a lag, which can make it even harder. From the time you're exposed to the time you're diagnosed as a case, that can be on the order of a week. And so you may be making progress, and it may take a good week for you to be able to say, wow, what we're doing is having a big impact.
With hospital supplies running low, today the governor of New York announced that hospitals can split ventilators, use one machine for 2 patients. How does that work? I mean, is that safe?
Well, you know, it's not something you would want to do outside a situation of scarcity. But in a situation of scarcity like we're in now, and you don't want to overstate scarcity. I was hearing in other reports that there still are ventilators available, but you can see where we're headed. We're heading to a situation where there's tough decisions that are going to need to be made. And if it's possible to take one ventilator and have it support the breathing of more than one patient, that would be terrific, and might buy us some time until there's additional protective equipment, additional ventilators, additional material to go around.
There's a lot of confusion about what to do if you've recovered from COVID-19, when you can come out of isolation, for example. ABC's Kaylee Hartung had the virus and told us that she's been getting mixed messages. I mean, can you tell us about the new guidelines that the CDC just put out as far as when you, in theory, are no longer contagious?
Well, some of the challenge here is that the science is still developing. The hope is that after you've had an infection with COVID-19, you can't get it again and you'll be immune. But we won't know that, and we won't know how long protection lasts for quite some time, given that it's a new infection. It's important here to follow the guidelines of the CDC, of local health departments, so that you're not putting other people at risk prematurely.
Dr. Besser, always great to have you on. We thank you very much for your knowledge.
Thanks so much, Lindsay.
And when we return, the good news that we also desperately need. But first, our myth bust of the day.
Right now, how do you make sense of it all? Now, afternoons on ABC, one place with the good information you need.
We are all in this together, and we're going to get through this together.
Pandemic, what you need to know. Afternoons at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC. Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime, 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
That music takes me back to my childhood. We are remembering a basketball legend tonight, Fred Curly Neal. You remember him. He played more than 6,000 games for the Harlem Globetrotters. Well, he's passed away in Houston. He was known for his slick ball handling, his recognizable shaved head, and plenty of playful banter. Fred Curly Neal was 77 years old. Finally, tonight we want to give you a reason to smile and laugh in these challenging times. So James Longman, he has our good news roundup.
Hi guys, I hope you're managing okay. The news out of Italy has obviously been really sad, but there might be a little bit of light at the end of a very dark tunnel. The authorities there are saying that the infection rate is starting to stabilise, so a little bit of hope to hold on to. So first up, let's look at Italy. Take a look at this video. It was shared by the mayor of a town where an 86-year-old woman is coming out of the hospital finally after 7 weeks battling coronavirus. What a wonderful thing to see. And back in the US, we got a chance to check in with Geneva Wood. Now, she contracted coronavirus at the Kirkland Care Center in Washington State, but she's now tested negative for the virus and she's on the road to recovery. This is her incredible story.
To knock her down one more time, it was cruel. But instead she got up. She wanted us to be proud of her. She didn't want us to think that she was a quitter. And so it turned into a story of fight, determination, and hope. Like, never give up and never underestimate the power of people coming together with positive thoughts and prayers.
I beat the coronavirus. I have a lot to live for. And God gave me the strength to do it.
And while most of the elderly are in isolation, it does not mean they can't have fun. Take a look at this. And this is a bit of fun as well. You've seen people hoarding toilet paper unnecessarily. Well, they need the poop calculator. And yeah, you heard that right. It's an application on your phone and you can actually calculate how much toilet paper you need. So I've done it here and I've got 12 rolls in the house. There are 2 of us here and apparently I have enough for 72 days. Check it out. It means you won't be hoarding toilet paper unnecessarily. And take a look at this.
I'm going to unmute you all. Here we go.
It's a virtual choir, uniting people from all around the world from the comfort of their own couches.
One love. Maybe I shouldn't. One heart.
Let's get together and feel alright.
We caught up with the founder, James Sills.
I think the reason that people have really responded to this is just because it's something that makes them feel connected to other people. So at this time, that's just so imperative that we feel some kind of human connection. And I think something that's just positive and that's hopeful and is creative. I think all of these are just really important things anyway. And maybe it's taken something like this to just make us realise that.
It really is a beautiful idea. And because we can't get enough of your catchy tunes, have a look at these, repurposed especially for coronavirus.
We're shut down. Everything is closed. Don't touch your face or you might get exposed. Stay safe. Stay clean. I really hate COVID-19.
Stores are out of toilet paper. Don't know what we're gonna do. COVID-19. COVID-19.
Definitely a catchy tune, and we are loving all your collaborations. Take a look at this student. She organised all her friends remotely to sing along in a rendition of What the World Needs Now.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone.
And this was quite the homecoming. Actor Matthew Lillard's daughter has been battling cancer. She had her last session of chemotherapy, and take a look at how her neighbourhood welcomed her home. And we'll leave you now with this prescient 2003 message from none other than Nelson Mandela.
Everybody should practice good hygiene.
Stay well, everyone, and be good to each other.
Stay well indeed, and thank you, James, for that. Before we go tonight, one more heartwarming moment for our image of the day. A New Jersey man who wanted to thank the hospital workers who cared for his wife but was unable to go inside, so he got creative and wrote this note, which reads, "Thank you all in emergency for saving my wife's life. I love you all." And that is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.